do you want to pick maybe one in particular, a company working in this space, and go a little bit deeper?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of listeners are familiar with Arena Pharmaceuticals. It's very active in this field. It has one FDA approved drug for the treatment of obesity. It's called Belviq. Christine, I don't know if you've talked about it on the show before.
I would be surprised if we haven't. Yeah, the
Yeah.
obesity drug makers definitely garnered a lot of interest, particularly in the early goings of these drugs. Really, really huge promise. Clearly, obesity is something that a lot of people are struggling with. And so you look at that market and you say, oh man, if somebody could create a good drug to minimize obesity, like that should be huge. But
It's exactly it should be. If you look at the performance of Arena over the last year, the shares have dropped around 65%, and over the last 10 years, they've dropped around 90%. And a lot of that decline has been driven by the hype around obesity medications and unfortunately the poor sales that have followed the launch. So like you said, a lot of companies were competing for a piece of this market. They all found that demand for the drug for this indication just was not as robust as they previously thought. Now, what's interesting about Arena is even though sales of Belviq have been very slow to ramp up, at the JP Morgan conference, they mentioned that they're going to try to de-emphasize its obesity drug and instead focus on its pipeline, which is full of drugs that target GPCRs. I think it's a good move. I think there are a lot of interesting drugs in development there. One targets the S1P1 receptor, GPCR, G protein couple receptor, so that's in that drug class as well. This is a very competitive market. There are drugs from Celgene and Actelion that Arena would have to potentially compete with if it gets FDA approval. But it's also a big market. It's in the autoimmune space. Arena also has a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim on CNS drugs that could lead to more than 240 million in milestone payments. But look at Arena's cash burn; it's around $100 million last year. It does have 150 million in cash, so there's not an immediate cash crunch coming. But as an investor, I would say wait until you see some of the readouts from its phase 2 trials. Don't focus too much on the phase 1 trials in this pipeline. It's still way too early to attribute any value to those. So I would say wait for readouts from the phase 2 trials before revisiting it. And at the same time, there are other companies that we'll talk about later in the show that have even deeper pipelines than Arena.